Hey guys, Henning and Morten from FlippedNormals here. And in today's video, we're doing something, I guess, very different. There's no immediate feedback or no special tips or anything. We're looking at Henning's and myself's art progression since we started doing 3D back in 2005 and 2006, right? Something like that. So it's been quite a long time. It's now 2019. I don't know how to math. What is that in math?
That's around 14, 15 years.
Okay, that would be that. So quite a long time by this point. And I remember watching this video from Danny Mac where he did the same. And I thought, that's genius. We should do that. Because it's fun, and it's also been fun to us just to go through the archives, like try to rummage through old forums and finding old blog posts from us, and like just really, like I have a hard drive with things that I've been trying to go through just to find old stuff. So a trip down memory lane, but it also, we thought it'd be a good, sort of like an interesting way to talk about art progression and how you can sort of like expect to progress and learn once you get into the field, or if you're even into the field.
Yeah, we see this a lot where we have people who are beginners to the field where they're thinking that you have to be good from the start, and they're panicking because they're not good now. But the way it works is that it takes you years, and it takes you hundreds of pieces and thousands of hours to do it. And in this progression, you're hopefully going to be able to see how long it took Morten and I to get to a level where we're comfortable with our trade.
So to start off with, this is my wonderful piece. It's, as you might be able to tell, it's a self-portrait of me.
Clearly.
Clearly, you know. And this was one of the, I mean, this is only a few months after I started doing 3D, I think. I took some reference pictures. I was working in 3D Studio Max at the time. Loaded those up, and then I started modeling. I tried to model a few cars, and I was doing ArcVis at the time. So that was like lining up some cameras or planes and then just trying to model this how I would model a car. That didn't quite go according to plan. So it's interesting to see sort of like the fundamental, I guess, misunderstanding of how things will be structured in a face, but more importantly, absolutely no concept whatsoever when it comes to topology. Well, I mean, I guess by definition there is topology, but not a nice topology. It doesn't flow. It's not for animation or anything. Everything just sort of goes across the mesh. And I remember coming across this in an old forum post many years ago, and I saw it. I was like, I have to save this just to have it for the future. Yeah. I've modeled in the lids as well, like eyelashes as well, just to get it in there. But it was like at this time, it would be hard to expect someone to be able to do a self-portrait. I mean, I don't even have ears in there, you know. That's
because your ears grew out after this was done.
Yeah, but it's not. I wouldn't say it's uncommon to see this kind of model from someone who's just starting out in 3D, because there's still, your brain is getting adjusted to how to think about form in a lot of ways, and dealing with, like we've talked about before, dealing with both form and the technical challenge of doing nice topology at the same time is such a big issue, and it's really hard to tackle those.
So the way we deal with this is you just do a lot more of it.
And we have
this is some of my earliest stuff. It's very hard to find very early stuff, but this is as early as it can go. And this is from, I believe, 2006. There was stuff on top, and then 2007 on the bottom. Stuff on top is Zbrush 2, and stuff on the bottom is Zbrush 3. The stuff on top, I believe, Zbrush didn't have a perspective camera, and on the bottom, Zbrush 3 had just come out, which had subtools. So you can see, right, the guy on the bottom right, that, I mean, it doesn't look great, but it kind of resembles the person. But if you look at the middle guy, this guy here, it's the same guy, it's the same sculpt. It's just that the camera angle is different. So I could always like kind of cheat it to make it better, to make it look better than it actually was. But very humble beginnings, very early on. Didn't know anything about anatomy, just trying to replicate something I saw online. It's just trying to get the shapes to be right, but having no idea about anything really.
It's also interesting when you think about like that one versus that one, right? So polymodeled in Max, and sculpted in Zbrush. Already like the difference it makes to have a tool where you think you're approaching it in an artistic way, where you're like, how can I recreate the form, and not so much how do I soft select things and struggle with pushing things around. But for both of us, it's like the kind of feedback that we give to beginners nowadays as well is just in terms of structure, bony landmarks, and building it up slowly. And then of course observation and just a lot of studies over many years. Drawings from him?
Yeah, so this is when I was doing drawing at the same time. This is 2009. I was 18. Disclosure: we are now 28 and 29, I believe.
Yeah,
it's hard to keep track. And so this year was, been doing art for a few years, and I was doing a lot of drawing and 3D at the same time next to each other. And I could always tell when my 3D got better, my drawings got better, and the opposite. And I never understood why that was. Well, the reason is because your observational skills are getting better. It's not that you get better at handling the pencil, but it was all reference based, like heavily reference based. There was nothing original about it. It was they were technical exercises just to see if I could actually do it.
Yeah, and for me, I didn't start drawing until I was 19, I believe. Not really, everyone like as a kid they probably sketch and stuff, but for me it started quite late. And so it was interesting coming into this world of 3D and art where a lot of people have been drawing for a long time. I felt really handicapped for a long time, but spent the next 2 or 3 years pretty much exclusively just doing drawing.
And I could draw from reference, but it's very important to know I could not draw from imagination. I had no understanding of volume or really design or whatever it was. I could draw okay if I had reference to draw from.
Yeah, for me, I tried to copy a few things, and I went to this drawing school for 3 or 4 months, I think, where it was focused on this old Russian Baroque technique of drawing, lots of charcoal and stuff. And that really helped me in terms of getting a better understanding of form and anatomy. And like we've gotten this question a lot, sort of, do you need to draw in order to be able to do 3D? And like, no, you don't have to be able to draw, but doing the two in conjunction with each other just helps out. Like Henning said, his drawing became better and his 3D became better, and vice versa. So it's not a prerequisite at all, but I think it really helps you understand form and observation. And we have one of my earliest Zbrush sculpts that I could find. This was when we said it was like 2010, 2011, I think. We figured out. And yeah, that was like getting into ZBrush. I got into ZBrush later than Henning. I was doing a lot of ArcViz before that. I started working as a freelancer at the age of 15, right at like right around the time I turned 16, but that was all like architectural stuff. I did kitchens and living rooms. I did a few character pieces as well, but this is really when I started getting more and more into ZBrush and started focusing more on characters instead of just hard surface and kitchen counters. So this was an exciting time for me, but there's still like, it's so interesting looking back at these and seeing like trying to take this simple approach to it, because I guess it was very intimidating with more realism and something hyper detailed or anatomy. And for me at this point, I really wanted to work for something like Pixar or DreamWorks. So I was much more focused on the stylized stuff than I was the realistic stuff.
Going into ZBrush also just kicks your ass, because that's when it's just raw artistic talent, and you can see if somebody has it or hasn't. And at this point, like for both of us, we had to learn to become artists, not just 3D artists.
Yeah, and this time ZBrush they had like a CPass for the renders, so I put like depth of field on all my renders.
And then we have some more sculpting. So here I was super excited because ZBrush 3 had just come out. And of course you don't have to texture a gorilla if you have a gorilla madcap. So that's what I used on a guy on the right here. And in here you can see that I'm not really understanding sculpture still. I can replicate something and you can see that it looks like a gorilla, and the guy to the left, he was supposed to be something out of Gears of War. But there is no like, you can see that kind of there are strong basics where like I could sculpt in terms of I can use the tools and that, and I could spend a lot of time on it, but the fundamentals were all over the place. Like I had no understanding of anatomy whatsoever, and it would still take me some time to me to understand that. And the way I got to that point where I started understanding some anatomy was just to do a lot of sculpture.
But it's interesting, here, just like let's critique our artwork, right? And I like it's kind of what we preach about a lot is sort of like the mid-frequency detail, and that's what we keep missing in a lot of our sculpts. For both of us, that we don't add that. We have the silhouette and we have the base shape down, and then over to detailing it, adding whether it's wrinkles or veins or pores or something like that. But it's one of those fundamental steps, the mid-frequency, that all beginners tend to overlook because it's really hard to observe those details.
And this is why we're so adamant on it, because we have both gone through this and we actually understand it, because it took us years to learn. Then we have more stuff as well. I still have no idea about anatomy here. This guy on the left, I don't understand anatomy at all. I'm just looking at like an crochet sculpt and I'm just trying to replicate the shapes I'm seeing. I don't understand the shapes there. I'm literally just looking at the shapes and trying to not even to understand it. I'm just trying to get the shapes across in a sculpt. And the guy to the right, that was in my XSI days, rest in peace. And this is all just modeled up in Modo, and then model in Modo or XSI, and then just sculpted in Zbrush, brought back into XSI, and then just rendered there.
At this point, there's at least some mid-frequency in there. You know?
Absolutely. Still no understanding of anatomy though.
Yeah, but it's actually interesting because a lot of that's how we learn in the beginning, right? We try to observe and then we try to replicate. And for this one, it's pure observation. You see something in a picture in like your printer, you try to replicate that. Like an interesting one that I just noticed was sort of like this. It's a very womanly hip, kind of like lower angle, no oblique and stuff. And you can run into these issues if what you're approaching it with is pure observation without actually understanding, where the bony landmarks should be, how should the muscles actually attach. But this is how we learn, and this is how everyone learns. So it's about doing more and more of these studies to get better. Then I had like a phase of just getting more and more into ZBrush and just doing speed sculpts. And I just did a lot of these. This is a selection of them. There's more where these came from. But it was like my way of getting more into ZBrush, but also trying to get better at understanding form and understanding form for characters in 3D. Playing around with expressions is sort of like, this is where a little bit of my fascination for expressions and faces started, because I started getting more and more comfortable with the tool and just exploring it and figuring out that you could actually do some quite interesting stuff in ZBrush. But yeah, I just did a lot of these. Like I don't have a count on how many, whether it's speed sculpts or small projects or like an evening project here and there, but it was 3D every day, especially while we were in school. It was 3D every day for 3 years, with FlippedNormals coming in later in the picture there as well.
Great idea. This is me in 2008 and 9. Again, just keep refining my workflow, where I was modeling and stuff up in Modo, sculpting ZBrush, and I was also learning Max at the time as well, because I had to use Max for work. I just started my first work early in February, around February 4th or so, 2009, and very early days, was no way qualified for the job, so I just had to learn as quickly as I can. But also keep in mind, right, how early days this was for 3D. This is rendered in Mental Ray for Max, like two tools I don't even use today whatsoever.
Yeah.
Like they're completely obsolete. There was no Substance Painter, there was no Mari. Computers were slow as hell. So just, yes, artistically I was also struggling with everything, but the limitation of the tools as well we had, that was really hard. There was no FlippedNormals tutorials we could watch to learn how to do ZBrush or anything like that. It was barely YouTube. So
yeah, it was actually quite scattered at the time. I mean, sure, there was like some Gnomon workshop stuff, but like most of the stuff that I got was just 3D websites, and we both hung out on various 3D forums at the time. That's how you got better and how you tried to improve. I mean, you would look at other artists, look at what they were doing, trying to get feedback from artists on forums. I guess the problem at the time was that there were so few, I feel like, good people, and they didn't really hang out on forums. So a lot of it, like, you're maybe comparable skill levels, so it was hard to get, to push yourself especially if you compared yourself to other artists, because maybe they weren't actually that much better than you.
And also here as well, this is not sculpt in ZBrush and retopologize. This is the opposite. This is the old school way. This is build a base mesh in Modo and then try to sculpt on top of it. Because retopology wasn't really invented at that time.
Yeah.
No tools had proper retopology tools, because sculpting was still very fresh.
I like how it's like he's clearly on a spike, and you know he's very happy about that. But then, like as a subtle detail, he wears like this arrow helmet.
Yes.
Like the arrow is not going through his head. No, it's like one of those helmet things.
I had an idea for it. I can't remember what the idea was. I just liked making silly little pieces.
Here's I've been playing Mass Effect. I think it was Mass Effect 2. As you can maybe tell if you played Mass Effect, with like the orange stuff and looking into space. I called this. I had this period of my life around this time where I wanted to name everything in a stupid way. So this one was called Dirty Spaceman. I don't know why, but that's what I came up with. And this is where it's actually pretty interesting. So this was all sculpted in the ZBrush, and this is let's call it dark time in my life where I took Scott Eaton's anatomy course at this point, which mistakenly I thought that made me an anatomy god. So at this point in time, this is where I started going ham on some people on ZBrush Central, just tearing their pieces apart, because it was like, well, your anatomy's wrong here, here, and here. But as you might be able to tell, it's not that my anatomy is the greatest. But I will say, at this time, that's really when part of the anatomy of humans started to click with me, because I'd been doing it. It was like a 8-week intense course every day with assignments, deliveries on Fridays. You know, you had crochet drawings, looking at pictures and different sculptures of how to do anatomy. And from here on out, that's when I feel like, you know, getting that boost, getting someone to point you in the right direction of how to do things instead of you trying to, you know, solve the mysteries of the universe yourself. That's really what can help you get to the next level. Like if I were trying to do this myself, get to this point myself, I would still not be where I am today.
Yeah, I was in a very similar spot. I took the same course as Morten as well at almost the exact time. There are a lot of parallels here. We didn't know each other at the time, so it's quite funny how those little coincidences work. But a course like that was absolutely like essential for me to get my understanding. You can see like a click happening for both Morten and I the moment we understood anatomy.
Yeah. Yeah, and like this is so the approach for this piece here was, this is sculpted in ZBrush and retopologized in ZBrush. This was back when we used to use a pen like a C-sphere, and then we would attach geometry. Like you would actually click each individual vertex to create a face, and you would do that all the way around and connect everything. It was a painful process. But I still think at the time it was actually the fastest way. Maybe Topogon. I mean, Topogon was probably out, so you could
Topogon existed, but I was using that at that time. But that was one more software to get.
Yeah, and it's not like, as a student, software is sometimes hard to find, right? So, but yeah, this was an interesting piece. But you can see that it still suffers from that same mid-frequency problem. Silhouette is there. You could argue that the silhouette could be interesting, I suppose, but look how soft this is. This is like cloth detail. Obviously this is supposed to be leather. The fact that it's leather might just be like my excuse for not having detail, and everyone's like, yeah, leather, it doesn't crinkle at all, right? But you can see how lacking it is in terms of detail. It's a very simple shape. It's like I got to the first stage of creating something. It's like, okay, now I have the silhouette of it, and then just a little bit of texturing on top, call it done. And that's sort of like the theme of when you're starting out with 3D. I feel that it's going past this level and then straight to detailing, missing the essential step in the middle.
But in your defense as well, Marvelous Designer wasn't a thing anymore.
Maybe
the earliest version was getting out there, but it was nowhere near as ready as it was today.
No.
So like if somebody starts today, they wouldn't try to sculpt it. They would just make it a Marvelous Designer.
Yeah. I like how he has like this little cup. Space cup. I think it was probably something I was thinking like, oh yeah, he's in space, need radiation protection or something.
But only in his groin.
Yeah, that's a interesting detail. And this was then when we started in school, actually, the animation workshop, and then I think I started doing a few more of these in like full pieces with a character and an environment to try to tell a story. That's a lot of what the school we attended was about. It was like storytelling. Yeah, I don't know. I don't have much to say about this. It's just a simple stylized character.
But it was to a point though where you can see that there is focus on composition, and there is actually like this is a big leap up here as well. The texturing is pretty decent, and it shows an actual moment.
And this is where this is why I say it's not essential to be able to draw or paint, but it helps. This is where up until this point, I think maybe it's been about a year of me drawing and trying to paint pretty solidly, almost every day as much as I could. And at this point, you're starting to see that kind of pays off. I'm starting to understand composition more, like Henning points out, like figuring out how to play with colors, how do you frame something, create nice contrast in an image. So that's where that really helped me.
Yeah, this is from around 09 as well. This is after I've been doing 3D for maybe around a year professionally or so, and technically I was getting to a point where I felt I can do a lot of different things, but artistically I'm still struggling. Like I still didn't understand anatomy. This is all reference based stuff. Well, the guy on the right, that was original design, but there's still no anatomy. There's no understanding of it. The only reason this looks even remotely okay is because I was good at cheating things. I was good in Photoshop because it was the first tool I had, so I was able to do some sick paint overs and really make the work a lot better. But if you were to evaluate the 3D models as they were, like this here would not in any way fly.
But you can see at this point, with the previous image as well, now we're starting to get into a stage where there's at least some polish on there in terms of trying to present your image a little more instead of just a raw screenshot or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. But no Substance Painter, no Mari, didn't exist for many years still. Yeah. So you just have these limitations. It's like poly painting.
And bad UV tools in Maya, and it's just a mess. I did this while I was doing an internship. So this must have been my first year in school as well. So during the summer of my first year, I did an internship at a company called Ghost in Copenhagen. And I've continued to work with Ghost for a long time after that, doing projects. And it was a wonderful studio. It was a great opportunity for me. And again, this was like trying to get more into storytelling. And in this image, I actually got a lot of help from one of the concept artists that worked at Ghost, and he saw what I was doing, and I brought in the renders, and he gave me feedback on color, composition. Like he did a lot of paint overs on this, like as my work in progress, sort of like suggestions, maybe create a little bit of vignette, have some light come in from behind to suggest there's something in the background, how to focus it on this. So you can see, technical 3D knowledge, and that's starting to get to a point, but there's still a lot lacking in terms of the pure character work, like still very flat. I guess you can see that this is where my knowledge of the ArcVis stuff that I've been doing sort of like helped me out a lot more. There's like a discrepancy in detail between the environment and George Lucas here. I can't remember, this was like, I think this image was like called The Saga Continues or something. And it's like, I thought it'd be funny to put in like a little wad of money here in the background because like it's George Lucas, and I found like a model of the Millennium Falcon. They didn't want to model that because there was no need to. And then this is where I started getting more and more into let's call it cheating, right? Where you don't make everything yourself because you're starting to realize you don't need to in order to have a complete picture.
This is where I would say the first time looking at your work where it's like, okay, you could work professionally now, where it looks like a professional level illustration. And if you are at this level and let's say your character sculpting is getting there, like it's easier to sculpt stuff professionally than it is for personal pieces because there's a lot more support there. You have a lot better reference and you have a lot more people who can help you. Yeah. So and this was the level when you first started doing professional work in this regard outside of ArcVis and freelance, I believe. And then I think I'm again a year behind Morten here or something like that. This is where last years of high school where I did a lot of these pieces. This is Modo and Max. And you can see I'm trying to do, if you look at the bottom piece or the bottom left, I'm trying to just do like this really nice, not ArcVis scene, but like this really nice and soft, cozy scene where I just did a lot of prop modeling. And I also put in a lot of Easter eggs. So there is a flying pig chasing a cake on a balloon.
But were these were older models that you'd already done? Right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so you can see the guy with the head, with the arrow through the head. He's also in there. So
did you use Ivy Generator?
Yeah, I used exactly Ivy Generator for this.
I missed that tool.
But this here is also tricky because, again, like, not to say that my skills were fantastic, but like if you were to throw this into Arnold today, it would look twice as good already. There were no PBR shaders. The linear workflow doesn't really exist yet. Everything is just all over the place, and no texturing tools. But I really like to make these fun little scenes. The guy to top left, I was trying to make a fun little story where he's pretending to be a shark. It just looks like he is a shark.
It does. I thought he was a shark.
Yeah, no, but you see he has a harness around him.
Ah.
But that should have been pink or something, like the fin or something, because it blends in. Because, yeah, it was supposed to be this stupid little fish who pretends to be a shark and he has a harness around him. And then I was commissioned to do this old meme. It's the weirdest freelance gig. I was commissioned by some guys in the US to do this, to do a statue of the Forever Alone guy, and you could actually buy that for some time at ThinkGeek. And it was so weird because this was the first time I saw that my work was being out there. And there was one guy, he posted his Forever Alone statue on Reddit, and he was like, he was so excited. And some other guy was like, why would you spend money on this?
Yeah, but it's interesting once you get to that point where you realize you can make money on what you do and what you like doing. It's a pretty interesting sort of realization. And
this is also the level where I felt like you kind of make most things. Like if I put my mind to it, I could probably make something which looked okay. But with the guys on the left, that you can see I still don't really understand composition. Like tangents is all over the place, and Morton was a lot better at composition in the thief image like you made there. But that was because I was like after animation workshop as well. So I still didn't have any core knowledge of anything.
This was
here.
Before you started attending the animation workshop,
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yeah. This was still in construction high school when I was building concrete buildings.
Then we have it's just me getting more into anatomy, I suppose. Trying to get more away from the normal 3D feel of doing statues. I found I can't remember the artist who did this, but this was like I was trying to copy the feel and the sculpture he did to just give like a clay feel to it, and trying to play with anatomy. At this point I felt like I had a better grasp of anatomy, and I could sort of plot in the major landmarks and muscle groups. Obviously still room for improvement, right? But it was more to illustrate the point that you could, in 3D, you could make something that kind of looked handmade.
But at this point, you were already working professionally, weren't you?
Yeah. And then this one, I don't know, I was just obsessed with The Legend of Zelda. I wanted to do something there. But it was like, in the time where I went to the animation workshop and did a lot of painting and started working professionally, I sort of, I got more into painting, composition, color, and realism, and kind of fell off on the whole stylized stuff. So I wanted to try and get more into it, but I'm still, at this point, I'm struggling, with the face. He looks kind of creepy. Could be a serial killer. But, as an image, it was okay at the time, but, definitely room for improvement. But even still, here at this point, I would say there's still that mid-frequency level of detail. I know it's a stylized piece, but there's still, you could do mid-frequency in textures, for example, to amp it up if you didn't want to do it in the model itself. And this is also where I think one of the first times I got into Marvelous Designer, I figured out, okay, this is pretty cool for making clothing, and I experimented with that on this link.
And then a year later, you did Baby Groot's costume
for
the official movie. That's how quick you can go sometimes.
So that paid off.
This was mid animation workshop for me as well, where this is when just starting to get more into the creature design, just trying to get something cool. Not showing the final piece here, but this is where you can see some of the anatomy is starting to get there, but still not really understanding, all of the fine things when it comes to anatomy. But I was pretty happy with the piece at the time. This was a huge step up for me because this was the first time I did something like a full creature like this. Textures were done in Mudbox and no PBR or anything like that. But this is a really fun piece for me. I spent a long time on this. This was fully sculpted, retopologized, UV textured, and all that.
How How long had we been doing 3D at this point?
I had been doing 3D. This is 2012 when I started. I've been doing it for 6 years at this time. So that's how long it takes, right?
Yeah. So then, just to give you an idea of like, of course you can fast track this. It can be faster than our progression, but you also have to think about, we had 4 or 5 years by ourselves in our room in the basement, just sitting in front of the computer, hacking away, trying to understand 3D concepts. I remember this super clearly when I first started at the animation workshop, because concepts that had taken me months to understand, like here's a simple one. When you put 2 edge loops close together and you subdivide your mesh, okay, you get a hard edge because now, there's 2 edges that are close to each other. That took me months to understand. It might sound silly, that is like, well, that can't be that hard to understand. But when you have no one to explain to you the concept of why this happened, you forget it. And even though you're following a tutorial, I was doing the Scotch class, I remember, and then I was trying to recreate that Scotch class, but from memory. And I couldn't understand why I couldn't get the edges to be hard. It was because, there was no supporting edges. And then seeing my fellow classmates getting taught these concepts, and they got it within like a week, the same thing that had taken me months because I was by myself. Now they had structured learning by teachers, professional teachers who were modelers. I'm like, you do this, and now your model works. It's the same thing with the anatomy. Taking the Scott Eaton course for us, that's kind of like accelerated our learning when it came to anatomy.
It's tricky as well to get to something like a level like this, because it's not that it has to take you 6 years at all, because that's an excessively long time. But there are a lot of things you have to understand here. It's not just about sculpture. It's about just technically you have to understand how to make the shapes. So you need to understand maybe C-series, Dynamesh, how to get the shapes. You have to understand how to do the wrinkles, the skin folds, the fine pores, all that. Then read topology in an efficient way. Then like some basic rigging as well. I was also posting this guy later on. Then how do you actually texture this? How do you plug everything into a shader? And how do you render this out to be appealing? And that just takes a long time. But I've seen students when I've been teaching at the animation workshop, and they've got to something similar to this in around 2 years, from first opening Maya until they're able to do something of this level. But that has also been with a decent art background, like art fundamentals from before as well.
Yeah, and more importantly, like a support network of people that know what they're doing around you.
Very much so.
Then more space stuff. I think for a while there I got pretty obsessed with space and everything related to space, and continuing the trend of silly stuff. This piece was called Skip's Leg Day. For
I love that name.
Obvious reasons, I suppose. But this is very much into more like a mixed media kind of thing, where I was trying to combine the things I learned about painting and composition with my skills in 3D. But again, it's still very apparent how like the mid frequency just isn't there. Like had it been today, I would have done something differently with it. Maybe the overall shape is nice, balance it out a little bit more, but definitely define some areas more, just so you know where to look. But the background, for example, that's completely painted. There's a little bit of 3D here on the ground, but then everything else to support it, that's pure 2D. Continuing that, I think this was just like I was doing something for work, I think, and I wanted to just get back into hard surface because I've been doing a lot of character stuff for a while. So just to keep myself up to date. At this point, I think, just moved to London.
Yeah, I think you were at the mill when you did this.
So this was
2014.
14?
Yeah, autumn of 14.
Yeah, see, Henning, he's my calendar there. I can't keep track of this. I have no idea what happens. It's just like, yeah.
Yeah, don't worry, I got your back.
Autumn of 2014, apparently. But this was more of an exercise more than anything, trying to replicate Bubble Crab. So it's not an original design. Bubble Crab from Mega Man 1 or like as the Mega Man X games, maybe? I can't remember. It's one of the bosses from there. I thought it'd be an interesting challenge.
And this is around 2013 for me. This is second year of animation workshop, and this is where I just wanted to try out some creature designs. This is original concept as well, just trying out different things. I wanted to make this huge fish. You see here in the top left, that's my original concept after a few hours, and he's trying to eat a little submarine. And then it's a work in progress in the bottom left. And I always I always hate this, but I always like my work in progress pictures better than the final piece, because it's kind of like when you're not really trying, then it looks better. When you're trying to get everything right at the end, I just feel that I always lose something there. But yeah, this was also a big level up for me because I had to combine a lot of different things to get this here to be right. This, I think, was rendered in Modo. I kept going back and forth between Maya and Modo for years.
And you can see at this point now, things are starting to click a little bit more, and we're starting to, get to a point where we're more comfortable. We can kind of make what we're seeing in our heads. More hard surface, just to, have more hard surface. This was actually a companion piece to this, so I can't remember the game. It was like there was some kind of game that came out around the same time where they had spaceships. It was like a sci-fi MMORPG kind of game. It was from a trailer or something. I thought the spaceship looked kind of cool, so I tried to do something inspired by that.
And this, as far as I know, is all Maya, right? Like this,
Yeah.
there is no fancy ZBrush hard surface or anything for this.
All Maya for this one. Painful,
Yes.
but a fun project.
Then I was also in the land of hard surface. It's not because I really wanted to do a car. It was because I wanted to make a reel so I can work in VFX. And one of the things we always recommend is that you show some variety. And I had a lot of characters. I want to show that I could do some actual modeling as well. One of the reasons I chose this model here, and nobody should ever try to attempt this model, it's a Rolls-Royce Phantom from 1937, I believe, 38, 39, around that. And it's this specific curve here. When I looked at a reference image, I was like, that is the hardest thing in the world to model. I'm gonna do that. So if you're looking at the wire here, it looks really nice and clean, and it actually worked quite well. But this here is extremely tricky to get right with poly modeling. But I just want to show in a reel that I was also a pretty adequate poly modeler as well. And this served me really well because my first job was in VFX was an internship at Framestore where I was only doing props. And if you're seeing something like this, then you're like, well, he can clearly poly model, throw him into production, can do almost any prop.
He can cut stuff into a car, get him in.
Yeah, that was tricky.
Yeah, these shapes are not good. It's not. It's also this, like cutting this kind of stuff especially into curved surfaces. That's when it gets really tricky. Then this was actually sort of like an update for an anatomy piece that I did. It was like one of my favorite statues. It still is, the Soldier of Marathon. And I did this. It was like I did the anatomy course with Scott Eden. Some time went by, and I started getting more and more into anatomy. Sculpted this up here, and then progressed to that. Tried to render it, and I was like, "This is freaking sweet. I'm done." Returned to it maybe a year or two later. I can't remember, and then I realized, well, I've rendered it completely flat. You can't see anything, any of my sculpting, nothing is in there. Like, it actually looked way better just as a screenshot. But then I started realizing that there was still a lot of things missing. I actually reached out to Scott at this point, and I was like, "Hey Scott, long time no see," and I was just wondering, he gave me some feedback on the piece, and super kind of him, and it was really nice, for him to take his time to do that. And then after that, I started thinking, okay, maybe I can go back to the piece because I already have. It's kind of like using a base mesh, but I wanted to take what was already there because it was decent. Like, I had the pose. I didn't need to do a lot with the pose. Maybe a little bit of the weight distribution on the hand there, but just in terms of updating the anatomy, seeing where I went wrong the first time and how could I improve that for the second time. And then I ended up with this new piece that I ended up putting into my reel, and actually still up to the last job I got in VFX, this was one of the pieces that they looked at, and I was like, oh shit, okay, this is legit. Nice knowledge and of anatomy, it looks good, and yeah, we'd like to get you in. So this piece served me really well in terms of jobs as well.
The reason why this is such a good piece is it shows fundamentals. It's very hard to fake this. The ways you could fake it is you could photo scan the original sculpt.
Yeah.
But if you haven't done that, you can't just look at it and try to replicate it. That's what I would have done, like in one of the earlier pieces you saw me do, were like 2009, 2010, where the difference between what I will be able to do and what Morten has been able to do is night and day, just because you need to understand what's going on. You cannot replicate this just from looking at the forms.
Just pure observation, unless you're like, let's call it gifted, then just pure observation won't get you to that end result. Also, another thing I wanted to point out, just because of all the suffering, was that this is actually sculpted cloth. This isn't simmed. It's not made in Marvelous. It's sculpted cloth. That was one of the challenges I set out for myself doing this piece, is that I wanted to sculpt the little cloth that he's sitting on, his penis cloth as well. Very, very tricky penis cloth shape. If you actually look at it, like in some renders, you might just be able to glance the tip there. That's right. Okay. So more stuff. So this is where I would say, for me, something started to click. So like in terms of progression, right here, and like I did this piece, was one of the first pieces I did in this, let's call it series, followed by this, followed by this and this, then that, and then this. And this is when, again, I got reference and I got more learning material. I started watching all the videos and buying all the videos I could from Philippe Farreau. Philippe Farreau is a fantastic sculptor from France, who lives in the US, I believe. And he has a way with faces. It's all traditional sculpting. And to this date, I still do this. When I sculpt faces, I will put on some of his videos in the background just to get like nuggets. You know, when I'm sculpting, he'll be like, oh, remember to do this with the zygomatic. I was like, oh, right, yeah, that's good info. Because you can't keep track of this all the time, or at least I can. So after I started watching those videos and diving deeper into those and I didn't replicate what he was sculpting in the videos, but I used the information that he was I used it as a sort of follow along tutorial, but with my own faces. And for me, that's really when it started to get to a point where I felt like I could sculpt pretty much any face. Still with a lot of struggle and questioning my abilities the entire way there, but it definitely became more achievable for me.
I will never reach a point in my entire life, no matter how good I get, when I will not struggle to make a face.
No,
I will.
It's always hard.
At every point, I will debate my skills as an artist and think that I am a fraud.
Yeah,
that is happening.
I have a fun story actually. This girl here, it's like a little Asian girl picture that I found on Google. It was like a stock photo. This it might sound like a lie, but it's crazy. I was at the post office here in Japan, and this was sculpted in 2013, I believe. Yeah, I found this girl.
What?
Yeah, I found the stock photo of this girl is in the post office in Japan right now.
That's amazing.
That's super weird. When I saw it, because when you sculpt faces, you study them for so long, and I saw it, I was like, no way. Yeah, so pretty crazy. But like overall, like this is my grandpa. I did a sculpt of him. So this was a combination of photo scans with my phone. So mind you, not the best quality, but that helped me get the proportions. And then I had a bunch of reference pictures so I could sort of line up and look at those and then translate that into the sculpt. I actually ended up 3D printing this as a gift for him.
Yeah, Morton, he was carrying a pocket grandpa around as well.
I still have it actually. Pocket grandpa.
So this is 2013 for me, where 2013 and 14, where I was again doing more of original characters. I just photo bashed some stuff together, put a little turtle along with a little whale, and just going on here. Here you can see that if you look at the top left, you can see that stuff is kind of starting to get when it comes to like mid-frequency and sculpture. I have a decent understanding of topology. You know, it was really nice and simple topology for this piece. And Mari was also released at this point, so we finally had a computer in school, where I could actually run Mari.
Time to go ham on texturing.
And this was really the first time I was doing texturing, like back in 2013. Before that, well, I'd been doing texturing for years. There were just no tools to allow you to do texturing properly. So this was when the pieces or stuff kind of clicked together for me as well. But again, keep in mind, right? It wasn't like we showing the pieces of the art pieces now. It's not that those were the pieces we did. We're showing like a select few of them.
We did a lot.
Between them, between every piece here, maybe there are like 30 pieces and studies and all that kind of stuff. And between each one of these pieces, there might be 5 months of progression of hard studies in school.
And also just like pieces that you do halfway and then you decide to scrap them. Yeah. You know, that happens so often. And it's interesting at this point because like now you're getting to that point as well. And you compare this where you feel like because of Zbrush matte caps, that okay, you're getting more depth in there. But when you actually start to render it, you see how much you can lose to, I don't know if there's actually subsurface on there.
No, not a whole lot.
But maybe the spec or something, right? Like how these, even the things that appear mid-frequency at this point, you're like, at this point, going back to it, you probably go in with the Damien standard, like carbon more, make the crevices deeper, make the volume sort of bulge up against each other. And it's always interesting going back to these pieces and looking at, this is my approach, this is what I would do today. But for both of us at this point, we're still missing things, but we have a more solid grasp on the fundamentals.
What I would do here as well is like one of my biggest things with this one today is that everything is very much the same color and same value on the character. Like if you squint your eyes, yeah, there are differences, but that's mostly lighting, and there are some like mid-frequency textures as well. But I would have made his shell maybe a lot darker and a completely different color, made his fins have a completely different color from top to the bottom, make his face very different. Like not just focus on the details. Like you see on his arm, there are some like splotches, and his hands has a lot of variation, but I would really make different areas, different zones of his body have completely different texture.
Yeah. And then, so I did a lot of the same thing with the previous faces there. I started doing a lot of streaming where I would just, I thought to myself, I'm sculpting anyway. So I put them up as Twitch streams and then I would just sculpt. And at this point, mind you, like I feel like I'm comfortable with faces. Kind of. I'm not comfortable. I feel like, okay, I can definitely do a face. And so this is how it starts out. I get to this point, and at this point, I'm starting to doubt everything. I'm like, I can't really see my way out of it. It's like I've done the concept. I think it was like a Ukrainian concept artist that I got the concept from, and I was like, can I do your piece? And I was like, oh yeah, that'd be awesome. So I started working on that. And there was something that just didn't work here. I think I left it for 3 or 4 days, came back to it, looked at some reference, maybe pulled up another Philippe Farreau video, and then went back into sculpting. And then you can see, boom, okay, something happened, right? The face is completely different. There's character in it. It actually looks good now. She looks kind of evil. Well, she looks super evil, I guess. And I think that's one of the things where like taking a break for me can really help. Like just get some distance from the piece if I feel like it's not working. Whoops, that was backwards.
And then around the same time for me as well, around 2013, I started doing a lot more like actual studies of faces. And this is where I did a lot of speed sculpts at this time. I really focused on like time limiting myself with the specific themes. So I was doing a lot of studies and a lot of designs just based on different themes, which I thought was a lot of fun, and it made me a lot faster, and it also made me simplify my workflow a lot. Because if you have like a few hours to do a piece like this, like I think the maximum here is like 3 hours for a piece, then you realize you can't spend time on the small things. You don't have time to noodle something here. You have to just get in the landmarks, and then you just have to move on to the next thing right away. But it was a really big thing for me actually doing more humans, because I've been doing a lot of creatures. So focusing on actual human anatomy helped a lot.
Yeah, and that also infers what you do with the creatures, right? So getting a better understanding of human anatomy, and especially facial anatomy, then you can start to tweak that and play with the proportions and everything for your creatures. So it's really beneficial to get into human anatomy.
It's why I'm so adamant that figure sculpting is the foundation for everything, because once you understand figure sculpting, then you can sculpt anything, because the concepts there are, clean, good shapes, correct anatomy, and just appeal, and everything else has that. Different proportions, but that's really the foundation.
Star Wars, yeah, Lando Calrissian, but in a Eddie Murphy skin, I think. That's kind of what people pointed out to me. I was like, oh yeah, it's kind of fun. This is me trying to get back into doing some more stylized stuff. Again, it's like it's clean, but I think at this point, looking at it, it's some years ago now, it's like it's too clean. I would probably have done things to like tweak it a little more. But at this point, we're working professionally. You don't have that much time to spare. We have FlippedNormals as well that we're doing on the side. One new free tutorial every week. We started getting into doing the paid tutorial as well, and so you got less and less time to do stuff for personal satisfaction.
Plus you're sitting with 3D 8 hours a day. You don't necessarily want to do more of this when you get home. and more figure sculpting for me as well. This is where I was getting pretty seriously into it and doing some more final pieces. I put some of these guys in my reel, and I was advised, hey, you need another character. So I was like, ah, shit. So I whipped up the guy or the woman in the middle, and just tried to make something very different. That was a very hard piece to make, because I was trying to make kind of like a Viking Valkyrie, but not like a young pretty woman, but somebody who wasn't necessarily beautiful based on traditional society standards. So very hard pieces to make. But at this point, I was working professionally in VFX as well.
And this was actually for a tutorial. It's for concepting with Zbrush and Marvelous Designer. You should check that. No, it's that was like me trying to establish a workflow between Zbrush and Marvelous more than anything else. And like with most of the time when I do these, I tend to go overboard. What I meant to do was, I'll just do this shirt thing here. And I'm like, okay, I'll do that. And it's like, I could give her like a shirt underneath and maybe some pants. Maybe I should model a helmet for her as well. Spent like more than a month concepting this in Zbrush. No, I spent like a month just doing the retopo for this helmet. Yeah, it was a nightmare. But, at this point, it was one of like, I don't want to bother with this part of the face. I actually ended up just taking the face that you saw from the demon lady earlier, sticking that on there, tweaking it a little bit. And then a lot of it's actually paint overs. So this is where I started getting really into paint over, getting my girlfriend to help me out here. She like did some light makeup for her and like tried to tweak it. And that's when I started understanding like the power of paint overs more and more. I hadn't done that many paint overs at this point, but at this point I started getting more into that to see like how can you actually use it to tweak your renders.
This was done right after I watched the first Pacific Rim, because I love that movie. At this point I was doing monsters day in and day out, right? Like you saw with some of the other characters. I just thought kaijus was the coolest thing in the world. There were times in the first film that I was involuntarily just clapping in the cinema. I didn't know why. I just thought it was so cool. So then I just went home and I just sculpted a lot of kaijus. There was this during the summer, and the reason I'm showing this one here isn't necessarily because this one is the greatest sculpt. This is like maybe a day or so worth of work, and I was trying to look at some of the original concept art from the movies. But the cool thing about this piece here is that in 2013 Pacific Rim 1 came out. Morten actually worked on that, which is
I did air condition units, I did cables, you name it, cities. It was really
cool, like seeing that first Morten worked on it, but also like it was awesome creatures. And my dream job at that point was like, if I could do these kaijus, that would have been the sickest thing in the world. And then 3 years later, Morten and I did the kaijus for Pacific Rim 2. Well, we didn't do all of them, but we did a sizable portion of the work on it.
Yeah.
I think I touched on all the kaijus apart from one when it came to some concept sculpting for them. And then Morten did a whole one, and then I did a whole one as well, apart from that. So that was like the coolest thing ever. You can actually go from being a student here, sitting in a tiny city in Denmark, and just having a summer vacation in a rainy city in Norway, and just sculpting. And then 2-3 years later, you're actually sitting in a giant studio and you're doing the sequel. The fact that is even possible is insane.
Quite a crazy progression when you think about it.
It really is. But it's not because both of us spent like 2 weeks practicing kaiju or something. It wasn't, nobody saw my kaiju work. And when I started in DNEG, the film wasn't even confirmed for another 2 or 3 months. But it was because of the consistent behavior we had for many years up until this point. So when we got the movie in, it was just natural that Morten and I would be put on it.
Yeah. There's that one left as well. Yeah, I watched. It's like one of those things where like a lot of the stuff that I watch inspires me to do something, and I wanted to do something more stylized, and this is heavily painted over. So obviously the Spider-Man is there, like the webbing is there, and I made everything from scratch in ZBrush, and then with the paint over and stuff. And this is I think we had a video about this as well. It's like a time-lapse thing. We watched the progression, which is a really fun piece for me, just to actually sit down and do some 3D for me. This is actually done here in Japan, so very, very recent.
The worst timing in the world, though. We launched the video and Morten posted a personal piece. The day Insomniac had their art dump.
Yeah, that's true.
You went to ArtStation and, you know, Morten's piece was doing quite well here. And then every single artist from Insomniac dumped their art at the same time. I am fully blaming Gavin Goulden for this personally.
Yeah, me too. Definitely.
And this was one of what it was for me in VFX as well. I wanted to make something a bit more stylized, but also do something more realistic. This is when I've been using Mari for years and using full on like XYZ texturing and just getting really deep into it. And at this point, like I was pretty comfortable in making most things. We actually have technology at this point where we have
good technology,
proper skin shaders in Arnold. We have Mari, we have Painter, we have all the tools needed. So yeah, at this point, this was one of the last personal pieces I did because we have no time and we have FlippedNormals.
Yeah, time ran away from us. And I think this is we have one more cheat. Here, a Marvelous Designer thing. That was more about the focusing on the Marvelous Designer. This is actually the base mesh. I didn't touch that. We have a creator on the FlippedNormals marketplace.
It's
Vassal, yes, who does these amazing base meshes, and he allowed me to use this for a tutorial. But this for me was more about getting deeper into Marvelous Designer again and doing something more advanced that had more detail in it, and just sort of like upping my game when it came to Marvelous, really. Very, very recent piece for me. It's hard to, I guess, be always critical about that, but it's I like the fabrics. I like what I did with the clothing there. It was a fun challenge for sure, and really cool to get more into Marvelous. I think this is the last piece.
And then the very last piece of the video. This is the last personal piece I did, and it's sad because it's over 3 years now. This one here is done like March 2016. But that's just the way it works when you have a full-time job. And I was working on Ghostbusters at the time, so I just needed a little break for that.
A while.
Yeah, that was a little while ago. So this was an exercise in sculpting fur and sculpting like a cape. This is where I put a towel on me, and I asked Morten to take a photo of me with a towel on my back. But this was a really fun piece to do. I think Beast is one of the coolest characters Disney has ever made. So I wanted to make a realistic version of that. It was also right before the official, like the live action movie of it came out. So I wanted to make my own version of that. But yeah, this is our art progression. We probably aren't going to do a whole lot of personal pieces from here on.
Probably not.
Because it turns out having your own startup takes quite a lot of time. And also now I feel that I get my creative juices out through tutorials instead.
Yeah.
Like small little pieces, and the feedback we get from the tutorials, that inspires me more than any personal piece can ever do.
Yeah, so it's like, the first 5 or 6 years, loners in our basements, just doing 3D, getting somewhere, but not getting too far. Then starting to get into a professional student environment where we actually have teachers that know what they're talking about, and then seeking out a lot more information by ourselves as well. After that, that's where I feel like our understanding and our fundamentals really started to take off. And then from there on, it's just a progression to get better and better. And, we're still not there. There's always more to learn. There's always more to be improved. But yeah, that's been the last, 13, 14 years for us?
Yeah. Yeah, at this point, we have now officially done CG for longer in our lives than we haven't done it. We've done it for more than half our lives now, which is pretty crazy. We will also do a separate video at some point about our professional progression as well, where we'll talk about some of the things we worked on in the film industry.
Yeah, so, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a comment down below, like and subscribe, and we look forward to doing the next art progression, the professional art progression, and showing it with you guys.
Thanks, guys.
If you're looking for training or high-quality assets, make sure to stop by the FlippedNormals marketplace, and if you're interested in supporting us by buying our merchandise, you can check that out in the description below.